my name is Elise Schrader. Today's date is Friday, March 29th, 2019. I'm interviewing Dr. Cheryl Bove on the Ball State campus as part of the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project. Thank you, Dr. Bove, for agreeing to participate in this effort, which we're conducting during the Honors College's 60th anniversary year. If you wouldn't mind, could we start by discussing when and where you were born?
I was born in Salem, Oregon, September 9th, 1944.
And then could you talk a little bit about your parents, what their names were, what jobs they had?
My mother was Maxine, and my father was Lester Arnold Browning. And he worked in the timber industry, and she was a housewife until they were divorced. We lived in a little town of 2,400 people, almost all of them Catholic. So that was difficult for my mother. And then she worked as a fry cook, as an accountant, doing the job she had to do to be a single mother.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had two sisters, an elder sister, Diane, and a younger sister, Kathleen.
What was it like growing up with them?
It was so much different than today. No one locked their doors. We knew everyone in town. I bicycled to school, which reminds me of an incident which will probably tell you quite a bit about the town I grew up in. I was not riding my bicycle wisely one day, probably in 4th or 5th grade, and a woman almost hit me. And before I got home, my mother had had a call from the pharmacist, who was her uncle, from looking out his drugstore window, from the woman who almost hit me, and from another passerby. And it wasn't a large town, so it didn't take me long to get home. And so the bike was gated for 6 months. But that's how small our town was.
Would you say that growing up in a town that small and that was Catholic, like you said, do you think that had a big influence in how you grew up?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And then what was your middle school, elementary school experience? What was that like?
Well, we moved to Denver in 7th grade because, basically because my mother wanted to get remarried. And so you didn't stay in a small, very Catholic community then if you remarried. And my stepfather, who really pretty much raised us from then on, was an electrical contractor. And so before 7th grade, I still continued to go to Catholic schools, but there were sports, volleyball, things like that, large campus. But when I moved to Denver, I went to school 15 miles away in downtown Denver. I lived in East Denver, to a Catholic school which had 2 buildings a block apart, a Cracker Box gym for boys only, no sports for girls, and a very different atmosphere because I wasn't allowed out after dark. Things like that. And driving, I think I got my license the first time I had my driver's license, I was in college, because my parents didn't want me driving in Denver. And today, when I leave my house in Denver, I am on a highway that is 75 miles an hour, and most of it is 85. And I have grandchildren who learn to drive in Denver with much extra private tuition because it's very difficult. The driving in Denver is horrible, like in any big city now. So it couldn't have been 2 different places in which to grow up. So in 7th grade, I guess I was naive because I came from such a small town, but the nuns had to take me aside and say, you can't wear a sweater to class, because once a week or once a month on on the first Friday you could wear civvies, not your uniform. And so I went home and asked my mother why. And she told me why. You didn't want to disturb the boys. Well, I wasn't disturbing any boys at 90 pounds, but that type of thing is just different.
Did that type of segregation with boys and girls, did that affect your ideas on education and how you should receive an education?
Not really. I think the fact that my area was British literature probably affected it more because of their segregated school system. And I do think that particularly junior high on, a single system still isn't a bad idea, because you can concentrate more on what you're actually doing rather than on impressing other people in your class, which happens. It's normal, part of life.
So you went to Cathedral High School, like you said, in Denver, and when did you graduate from there?
I graduated in 1962.
Okay. And then from there, did you go directly to University of Colorado?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a full scholarship to a Catholic women's college in town, Loretta Heights, which I didn't tell my parents about because I didn't want to go there. But I ended up there after all anyway. But so I was at CU, University of Colorado, for 2 years in engineering.
What initially drew you to engineering?
I was flying, and I was in Civil Air Patrol, which isn't that big here, but in the mountains, every weekend it's an air search and rescue. It's an auxiliary of the Air Force, but it's really for high school kids. And every weekend there were Flatbush pilots who thought they could fly into Aspen, which is a blind canyon, and with dire consequences. And so I did very well. I was like Colorado's. The Air Force took one senior cadet from each state, and the guys got to go to Texas and fly in a jet every day. And the girls got to go to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and I got a T-33 ride with the barrel rolls and the loop-to-loops and all of that, which I loved. And then they spent a long time trying to convince me to become a flight nurse, and I wanted to be in the front of the plane, not the back of the plane. So I wanted to go into aero, and I had a lot of strong math courses in high school, and so I scored high enough that when they did the counseling, they said engineering would be good. But it was kind of a bad time for women in engineering. In all of the engineering degrees and majors, there were only 17 women when I was a freshman. And many of our teachers were teachers from countries that didn't educate women. And so we had a barrage of uncomfortable things said to us daily. And, for example, everyone wore jeans to class. If you wore jeans, you shouldn't be wearing jeans. You should be wearing a dress. You shouldn't be here because you're taking a man's place. All of that. And it wasn't an encouraging place. And then I discovered that really the only courses I liked were my general studies courses. Now, do you know anyone who can say that? That the only courses they like are their general studies courses? And the high school I went to was very good. Uh, although there were only 117 in my graduating class, it was a small group. But I had a classical education. I mean, I did Dante, I did Latin, Caesar's Gallic Wars, all of that. And so when I eventually did start teaching humanities, it was wonderful, to see all of that again. But so after 2 years, I did not keep my 3.5 to keep my state scholarship. And so my parents said, okay, now you're going to go where we want you to go. And so I said, well, I don't know if I'm going to do that. So I applied to Braniff Airlines, which I don't think it's around anymore, but they used to fly South American route. And they accepted me, and so then I had to decide if I wanted to go back to college or if I wanted to go to Braniff and fly in the back of the plane. And so I went to work for about 6 months, and then I thought, I think, Braniff was still waiting. So then I finally sent them the no, I don't think I'll come, and went to Loretta Heights. And then I got married and didn't finish at Loretta Heights.
You mentioned, or I saw that your husband that you got married to in 1966 was in the Air Force for 5 years. And so that was during the Vietnam War, correct?
Uh-huh.
What was it like having your spouse fighting in the Vietnam War?
Well, he actually, although he volunteered, did not get to Vietnam because he graduated from the Air Force Academy near Colorado Springs. And he had astigmatism, and back then you couldn't fly unless you were 20/20 with no corrections. Now we sponsor cadets, and you can have surgery and correction, and then you're good to fly. And so had he been pilot qualified, he definitely would have been in Vietnam. But instead he was in space, and so his remote was in Alaska, and which remote means unaccompanied by your family. So what was difficult about Vietnam was really more when I was at CU, where the only people going to classes really were the students who were in engineering, because you really couldn't miss any of those classes, where everyone else was smoking pot, forming demonstrations, loving everyone in sight, free sex, the whole CU in the 60s was, probably what you think of Berkeley today, but, that type of thing. And so, I really, seriously, today cannot see a peace sign without having a knee-jerk reaction because of the nasty, vicious things that were said to people who were in the military who really had no choice where they went or what they did. And some people totally not a type who could do well in the military even. And these people who were on drugs, drunk, and some of them my friends, spitting in their faces, calling them baby killers, and all of the normal garbage that you get out of people who hate for really no reason, because I wasn't seeing a whole lot of constructive behavior out of them. So it wasn't easy.
Once he came back and you guys were together again, was it hard to continue on with life after experiencing that type of hate?
No, because, the military community is very, very tight, and we've always been close. As I said, we sponsor cadets, which basically means, you take a freshman, they can't drive, or they can't have a car until they're juniors. So, to get them off campus, you go get them on Sundays, feed them dinner, let them sleep, whatever, just to kind of have a normal life. And, of course, we didn't do that when we were in Indiana, but when we moved back to Colorado, we did. But, you kind of keep up with people. And when I was at Loretta Heights, which was almost like a boarding school for Chicago people, there were an awful lot. Most of those girls were brats. Their dads were high-ranking officers. And people, once you've been in the military, you know everybody. And as soon as you meet them, you're friends. And I really liked that. And when we were in the military, you're at the same place in your life. You're having your kids at the same time. You're stationed in the same place. You've got the same possibilities, all of that. And so it's really a community that once we got out, basically because his father had a heart attack and because of his family businesses, then, and also because he would have, every third assignment in the area he was in would have been remote without the family. The first time we went remote, we had a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old, and he was gone for 16 months. So that wasn't really easy, and a lot of our service work now is with the military. I mean, I have a cousin who was a priest in the Army, who was deployed 5 times, and Fort Carson being close, and I remember when he was stationed at Fort Carson, he would just give us the names of, enlisted families whose husband was or wife, whether they were deployed, and what you could do for them, what they needed, if they needed, furniture, we got furniture, that type of thing. So, you have your community within your community, no matter what else is going on in the political world.
Yeah. And so, was your husband from Indiana?
Yes, he's from Indiana.
And then you mentioned that he left deployment because his father had a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
Is that why you guys moved to Indiana?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he joined the family businesses.
And then you finished your bachelor's degree at Marian College, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
What made you choose to want to go there and finally finish your degree?
It was the one that was convenient, because my mother was dying of ovarian cancer, and otherwise I would have stayed in Denver with her. But I had 2 little children, so I stayed with his parents. And so my choice of where to finish school and where to get my master's and where to get my doctorate was completely driven by, I have a family and, I need to stay here. And so really what I needed at Marian College was just teaching credentials. But you had to take your last 30 hours someplace. And so that's why I went to Marian College.
Okay. And then from there you moved on to Ball State to get your master's.
Mm-hmm.
And then I noticed that's when you wrote your thesis on Iris Murdoch.
Mm-hmm.
And you've continued to write about her. How did you first find out and hear about her and become interested in her?
When I was at Loretta Heights in Denver, the nun who taught us had a Fulbright to England. And it was so long ago that Penguin paperbacks were unavailable for sale in the U.S. due to copyright reasons. And so she brought back with her by boat 12 copies of 12 different, in paperback, 12 different British authors who were young in their careers. Muriel Spark, Malcolm Bradbury, and Iris Murdoch, Kingsley Amis, people like that, who went on to be legends. And I had her for the class, and then she encouraged us to read everything we could about them and buy them. And so I started, sending for articles. And I chose Iris Murdoch because I had a philosophy minor, and she's a moral philosopher, was a moral philosopher, as well as a novelist.
So you finished your PhD from Ball State in 1984, and then you were immediately hired by Ball State. Is that something that you were excited about, or is that kind of a surprise?
No, I was happy. I wanted to teach. I definitely wanted to teach. During my student teaching, showed me that I did not want to teach English to students who didn't want to be in the classroom. And if you think back to junior high and high school, that's kind of the case. It's just not important or interesting. And I also wanted to do 20th century British literature. And so this gave me the opportunity to do it. Of course, initially, everyone has to teach freshman comp. Then you develop your list of things you don't want them writing about. Your first kill in the hunting field, that type of thing. My roommate's girlfriend will not sleep in her dorm. You don't want to hear about that. So there's this long list. Everyone you get together and you find out, I hadn't thought of that. But so I started out for teaching freshman comp, and then I was able to teach 230, which is British Lit. Probably still is British Lit. And then the Honors College, which really gave me the opportunity to do everything I wanted to do.
And you were also involved with the writing and the design curriculum in the College of Architecture and Planning.
Mm-hmm.
How did you become involved with that?
First as a writing consultant when it first began. Jane Haynes, probably interviewing Jane, Joanne Edmonds, several of us were friends, and I think it was Jane's idea to, talking to all the architects, because we were right across the street and we knew a lot of them. They didn't feel that their students, they took a survey, and Ball State had a top architectural program, but one of the things they lacked was the ability to express their ideas to their clients. So they could talk to each other, but they couldn't talk to their clients. So we initiated this program and then I directed the program later for a number of years. And you went into all three of the design studios, architecture, urban planning, and landscape. And their studios are Wednesday and Friday, 1 to 4. And you spend time doing projects and everybody had 3 different studios. I always took architecture because in a second life, I would come back and do architecture history. I just loved it. And then you talk to the students. You go like on Wednesdays, they would have a 2-hour presentation. You would go to the presentation, then you go back to the studio, and then you talk to them about their projects. I was on a thesis committee for architecture. I was the only non-architect. You are on panels when they do their presentations. You talk to them about all types of writing, whether they're doing, not just a term paper, but locating the important points in their design, whether how sustainable it was, cost, all of those things, and actually pointing out the things that they knew were in the design, but they were unable to express or did not, just assumed you knew it. And so that's the project that went on for so many years.
Do you think that project is similar to the goal of the Honors College in that students are meant to gain skills in writing and communication in subjects that they may know or may need to communicate to others?
Yes, and well, the other thing is that architecture students are very creative, as are honors students. And most of the architecture students, if you could talk them into being in the honors college, well, they would all qualify, but many of them found that the honors college had too much reading. You know, when they would look at the reading list, they would say, I don't have time for that because I'm in my studio 18 hours a day, you know, that type of thing. But we do ask, if you think about the honors college, it's so different than a program. Because with a program, like after I retired, I taught in the honors program at Denver Metro for a few years, just one course a semester because we were going back and forth to Arizona. And the requirements aren't the same, but yet, you know, you had to do 201, 202, 203. You had, you know, the types of things you were doing. It gave you an opportunity to look at things that you wouldn't see in your normal general studies courses, and to actually write about them, talk about them, and, you know, express your ideas. I remember the year of Darwin. We have a lot of fundamentalists in the honors college, and you know, they would come after the first, you know, after they read Fierro, the first chapter, say, this is wrong, you know, the world did not start on this date, and it is definitely not this old. And then you say, this is the material we're reading, and, you know, it may be offensive to you, but I'm not going to put you down for your beliefs, but you're going to read it. So when we did Darwin, they read Origin of the Species, Descent of Man, and then I also did a pre-questionnaire on what do you know about Darwin and where did you hear it. And then I also had another paperback that went to all the religions, Islam, Orthodox Jewish, Reformed Jewish, Buddhist, and what their position was on it. And some people recognized that they were in this particular religious group, but they didn't know their religious group felt that way about it. So, I mean, it's kind of who you have for a minister or a pastor or whatever. And, you know, I felt like, you know, there was a lot of dialogue there, even among students who, you know, may have been uncomfortable with the subject matter. But I wasn't out to convert them to the point where they would lose their religion, but just to have some type of a dialogue about it.
Before you became involved with the Honors College, what was your impression of it on campus, just as a professor?
Most of the people in the Honors College that had excellent teachers. You know, that seemed to be the criteria. It had open evaluations so that anyone could go in and read about the evaluations. They had person-to-person interchanges with their professors. I'm thinking, I have a good story and a bad story about Duke. One of the English chair's daughter was at Burris, and she asked me to talk to her because she was thinking of dropping out of Duke, or the daughter was. I had her in an honors class when she was at Burris. And the reason, and she did drop out, because the first day of class, her professors, you know, they always say, we're a great school, but you get the best of our professors. Well, the professor said, don't bother to call me or come to my office if you have a question. that's what my TA is for. And I thought, that was not a good impression from that school. So she dropped out, came back, finished at Ball State, got her law degree at the University of Chicago. So I think she did, and I think she had an MBA at the same time as her. So she did very well, and she was going to do well wherever she went. But I think her mother's point was, wouldn't it be nice? But then, my good story about Duke, and it really surprised me, is one of my honor students went there to law school, and I wrote a recommendation, and I actually got the only letter out of hundreds of recommendations that you write as a professor, wrote back to me and said they had accepted her and thanked me for writing the recommendation. And I was, I thought, I have never had a letter like this from anybody. But so I thought, and so when our youngest son, our older two children went to Purdue, and when our youngest son was going to play tennis in college, and the people who were recruiting him were Yale and Notre Dame, Cincinnati, Ball State, but he knew Coach Richards, from the tournaments around. He also knew the coach at Notre Dame, they had finished second in the nation the year before, and he said, no problem coming here, but you won't play as a freshman because we have too many coming back. He said, well, I want to play as a freshman. So he went to Ball State, and I said, okay, you can go to Ball State, but only if you go in the honors college. And I will say the men's athletic department was not excited about that when he told them that. They said, well, our athletes are too busy. And they really are. If you know student athletes, it's about 40 hours a week. It's a full-time job just being a student athlete. But he did, and he was fine. Whereas most of my student athletes that when I was teaching were girls. And so very few of the men came through as student athletes. But, so I knew he would get a personal as well as a strong education. And he went on to law school at Vanderbilt and environmental law at a second law degree at George Washington. So, with no problems.
How did you first become involved with the Honors College? Were you approached by somebody to teach a class?
Yes, I was asked to teach a class.
Who asked you to come and teach for the Honors College?
I'm trying to think who was dean then.
Was it
I think it was after Dean Vanderhill.
Dr. Wittig?
Pardon?
Dr. Wittig?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then, do you remember what class you taught, what honors class you taught first?
201, 202, and 203.
Okay.
They're still my favorite courses.
How did you approach those? What did you want students to get out of those classes?
Well, I wanted them to see a continuum of history and positives and negatives through history, that they would be repeating themselves in their own lives, because you can learn from the past, and you don't have to be bound by it necessarily, but to have no grounding. I feel that probably one of the most valuable things that I gained in high school was a classical education. And a lot of high schools don't give you that anymore.
Do you think the honor students were open to that type of approach, to learning more about history that way?
Mm-hmm.
And then how would you compare them to the students that you taught in your English courses, just your normal English courses?
I didn't teach, I taught a few maybe second level literature courses while I was teaching in the Honors College, but pretty much once I started teaching in the Honors College, then I was also teaching, half my load was writing the design curriculum. So that pretty much filled up my time. And when I first started teaching at Ball State, I taught part-time. I didn't teach. It was on the quarter system, and so I didn't teach winter semester because I was driving from Marion. And yes, I got caught in the blizzard of '78, which you don't remember. You probably weren't, you weren't born then, but maybe your parents remember the blizzard of '78. Or as I remember, they closed the university when you drove back. '69 was higher than your car on both sides with snow.
So I saw that you also taught a lot of colloquiums, and for those, usually the faculty gets to decide what type of topics they want to discuss. And so I saw that you taught some classes on Iris Murdoch, and then London, and then you taught Rome and Florence. So how did you come up with your ideas to teach those types of classes?
Well, I wanted to teach Iris Murdoch because, in fact, I'm going to Oxford in July for her centenary, but she was not accepted very well into American universities because she wasn't a particular type of feminist. For example, she was one of the few women to ever teach at Oxford, and she was an only child, so she received the education that a male in her family would have received. She was at a boarding high school with Indira Gandhi, for example, so who would have gone to the best of schools, and she was brilliant. In fact, Kingsley Amis once said about her, although he did qualify by saying woman, that she was the most brilliant woman he ever knew, and brighter than he was. And Kingsley Amis was quite proud of himself. So I thought that when she died and he said that, I thought that was pretty good. But, or his son recounted that story when she died. But, so she really wasn't accepted here because of that situation. Now, you could go to a conference and on her philosophy, but not on her novels, which were just amazing. And I was, continuing on from my Loretta Heights days, keeping up with everything she wrote and everything written about her. And I was encouraged by Joanne Edmonds, who was my office mate for many years, and she was doing Anthony Pohl. And of course, no one was reading Anthony Pohl either. So we would each include, and all of our friends would include one of the books. And which one do you think I should teach this year? Just to give the students some type of an introduction into something they wouldn't ordinarily read. So the Murdoch colloque was wonderful because a lot of my architecture students took it. And their projects, I still saved some of their projects. They said, you can keep it, and which we did a word child, which is about a very dysfunctional young man. And some of the things they did architecturally with that novel were just amazing. But anyway, and then the Roman, I did the Oxford colloque because I took students to Oxford fairly regularly. And then Dean Rubel normally took the students to Rome because he was a classic scholar. And he asked me one year, he said, I'd kind of like to have some time by myself in Rome. Would you be interested in taking them? I said, sure. Now, I had taken Italian. Dr. Edmonds and I had taken Italian together because we wanted to be able to pronounce Dante when we did Dante in class. So I'd taken my year of Italian because they only offered 1 year, otherwise they would have had to hire an Italian professor. And so one of the classics professor taught it. And my husband is Italian, and so he had grown up hearing it. And in fact, since then, we belong to an Italian conversation group in Arizona, as well as an Italian class, which has gone on year after year forever. And he reads the Italian paper online every day. And he said he's okay except for the politics. He just lets that go because he doesn't understand, unless he can talk to someone who, lives there. Do you know Michele Queenie? He's just a recently retired architect, and he's a friend of ours. And he's living in Peru, back in Perugia now. And he talked to Michele about it the last time we saw. He said, what's going on with this or that? But so I've kept up with that, and that was, so I loved taking students to Rome, and you could get the architecture then, particularly from the students. I mean, it amazed my husband that we would go to Oxford and London, and I directed the London Center 1 year, and then I had an NCHC London Citius text with Dean Emmerich one summer. And it just amazed my husband that at night the architects would get out their cameras and their photographic equipment and go out and do architecture things rather than going to the bars. It was just, it was a different type of student that was refreshing.
What type of aspect do you think actually traveling to the place that you're studying adds to a colloque, such as the London and the Rome one?
That traveling to it rather than doing.
What does that add for the student in terms of learning and engaging with the subject, do you think, traveling?
Just traveling or having a cloak and then traveling?
Having cloak and then traveling.
Okay. The first thing, Rome is so complicated that unless you, and there are rules about, like, I couldn't take my students through the forum and say, this used to be, that used to be. You have to have a licensed guide to say anything about anything in the forum as you are passing through. Okay, so you have an opportunity to learn about the forum and see what it used to be and where it came from, and the Pantheon. There are so many things that you can learn in a quote. There's an anthropologist, a French anthropologist, Iliad, who wrote about ancient religions and their customs and their beliefs, and going all back to the Aboriginals and to how they centered their sacred spaces on where they believed the gods would have them, and went on to prove, to my satisfaction at least, how churches still do that today, how dedicate, and then if you look about what are our sacred objects today? Sports stadiums, things like that. Okay, and art museums. But if you think about it, if you think about the Getty, have you been to the Getty? What are you looking at when you go to the Getty? You're not looking at what's inside it. Well, you might, spend an afternoon there. You're looking at the architecture of the Getty. So there's some things that, you can present that, and then you can present something on the meaning of the Pantheon. What did the Pantheon mean to the Romans? Well, no foreign had ever got to Rome unless he was going to be garroted after they got him there. They would win the war, bring back their show of booty, and then they would invite the leader in and take him by and show him how regulated everything was, how on axis. And if you look at the Pantheon is the epitome of Greek and Roman culture. Greek temple front, Roman roof with the oculus. The oculus, the gods are looking down on us. And if you look inside the Pantheon, all of those regular things, everything's in a circle, lines going clear around. We are the epitome of civilization. We have order. You are barbarians. All of that. And that's all telling you that. So think about, where are you from?
I'm from Fort Wayne.
Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
So what does your courthouse look like?
It definitely has a dome. So
It has a dome?
Yeah.
So it does look like Thomas Jefferson or something like that? Why does it look like that? It looks like that so that you can say, this is a hall of justice, and we are civilized. And we have 4 openings usually because everyone can come in. And so it's all of those things that if you just go to Rome and see the Pantheon, which you now have to pay to go see, what are you going to get all of that? And and this was just 5 minutes on what they're reading, and they're reading all these books that talk about meaning and the civilization and what was happening at the time. Augustus doesn't even have his name on it, and the gods that used to be there, they're all bringing us in. So it's that type of thing that you can go there, but if you don't have the background, if you haven't done any reading, then you miss so much in terms of what's going on and what the reasons were.
For one of the colloques that you taught to London, you actually mentioned in a Ball State Daily News article that you were surprised by the number of students that signed up to take it. Why were you surprised by that? Did you not feel students would be excited about the opportunity to travel?
Was this the London Center, or was this?
It was an honors colloquium to London.
It was an honors colloquium. They, well, in the first place, they're expansive. So, a lot of times you have to work right after school is over. And so if you're going to take 3 weeks off, then that's a difficult situation. And normally we have to cast around to try to fill the colloquiums, to offer them so that you can get a good price. But I think it was that more than anything else. London, I learned about London through Iris Murdoch's novels, and it meant so much more to me after that. And then after, the way I talked about the Pantheon, if you look at all of their buildings, which say, we were leaders of the empire, so all of those empire buildings. And if you just look around London, you can see the different stages they've been through by the types of buildings they have. And so, it's really interesting to me to look at that and to get students' reactions. So probably I was surprised that we actually filled the colloque so soon without saying, is anyone else interested in going to?
Earlier, you had mentioned that you were friends with Joanne Edmonds. What was your relationship with other honors faculty, and what type of community do you think that created?
Barb Stedman and Lynn Dalton, or that's wrong. Dalton, Dr. Dalton,
Beth Dalton?
Beth, there we go. And who else from the Honors College worked with me in WDC. So, we were all good friends. Jane Haynes. And we talked a lot about the students, about what we wanted the students to do, about what would be engaging for them, about the types of things that we might be able to bring into the program, what type of speakers we wanted, things like that. So I really shouldn't say this, but it was so much different than the English department. The English department was continually at war between British literature and American literature. We had a horrible situation where someone who didn't get tenure brought a gun on campus and then threatened for several years in a row too. And he finally was retired before I did, and he was a tenured faculty. It was not. It was what you would expect out of bickering academics. And I had 3 offices. I had an office in architecture, I had an office in the Honors College, and an office in the English building. And the last few years, I just went to my honors office and posted even though it wasn't an office I had by myself, and I had a private office in English, and I told the English secretary, if someone wants it, they can have it. She said, I'll just send your mail down to honors. And, because it just wasn't a happy work environment. And I find that sad. Whereas it was always a happy environment in the Honors College.
Kind of going off of that, you said you had an office, but it's kind of been a struggle within the Honors College to find a central location. Did you feel that was important, not just to create the community with the faculty, but with the students, to have a central location for classes and just to meet and talk?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we had one when we were at Carmichael. But it was now it's become more the campus, and now we have the Honors House. I was really pleased that they were going to have an Honors House, because I think that's really important, to have a smaller group and a place where you feel comfortable, particularly in a larger school. I really think you can get any type of an education you want at a university, but some places it's easier to get than others. And certainly our Honors College graduates have shown that you can do anything and with it. And Ball State doesn't have an elite name. It's known as a good school, but it doesn't itself have the elite names that you would normally think of as if you're a Notre Dame graduate. Well, you're going to get this big network of people who are going to give you jobs, that type of thing. But if you go to Ball State, you have that if you're in the Honors College, I think.
Did you ever feel that Carmichael was too far removed from campus and that it separated the Honors College from the rest of the university?
Well, somewhat. It was down there by itself. I didn't like the shape of the rooms, because you couldn't, there was no quiet. Yes, the rooms were separated, but there wasn't a wall. No one liked the shape of the rooms. You couldn't, have a round in a pie-shaped space. I thought the gathering space was very nice, and a couple of rooms, but for the most part, I think they're much better now.
So you mentioned the shape of the room. Did you like to do discussions within your classes?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel that honor students were very open to that type of teaching method,
Mm-hmm.
and that it engaged them a lot more?
Mm-hmm.
And then administration-wise, you came in with Dr. Arno Wittig as the dean. Do you remember what he was like as an administrator?
No, I didn't have as much contact with him. I mean, I knew him. I knew who he was. But he seemed very, very quiet. Everyone else I knew quite well. And it's probably too, I was new to the program, and I wasn't here. I wasn't on campus all of the time. So.
Then he retired in 1996, and Bruce Meyer took over. While he was dean for 2 years, did you remember anything significant that he did?
No.
Was it a big transition when Dr. Wittig came back after Bruce Meyer suddenly passed away? Was there any type of upheaval within the honors program, or do you think it just maintained its regular course?
No, I think that was someone who knew what he was doing, and a calming presence.
One of the big people who came in and tried to revamp the Honors College was Dr. Rubel. Do you remember what he was like as a dean?
He was very hands-on, open. You could talk to him about anything. And, he was particularly helpful to me because I was taking over his Rome colloque. But I can remember talking to him about, the books that we were reading about Rome, about the books I had read. He had a long list, and here's a couple more you can put on that list, and how about this? And he was just, like he was a faculty member. He was very good. He was very good with the students. The students liked him, had a very good rapport. I thought he was an excellent choice to come in. But yet he had his own mind on, how things should be done.
And then in 2008, you won the Vanderhill Award for Teaching Excellence from the Honors College. What was it like to receive that award?
It was very gratifying. It was unexpected. The student I later found who nominated me was, the first day of class in 201, I'm looking at my class list, and I look down and I see he's a senior. And he's tall, and he's not really thin, so he doesn't look young. And so we're introducing ourselves, say something about yourself. And he said, I'm going to be here until I'm old enough to leave home. I go, okay. He's 16 years old. And he was brilliant. He was a physics and chemistry major. He did fellowships. He went off to get a PhD straight through, and talked to our neighbor about the possibility, or whether it was better just to get the PhD or to get an MD with what he wanted to do, which was nanotechnology, because he wanted to help people with, he had a grandfather who was who designed for medical devices, and he wanted to do something like that, and he could see that that was coming and it would really be necessary. But it was so much fun having him in class for 3 years, because as a 16-year-old, he had a sense of humor, but it wasn't an adult sense of humor. And the class was so close to him, and I really, that they took him on and helped him become more of an adult. And it was, so I think that I'll always remember him. And as I said, I was just really kind of stunned. I was gratified because I have a Ball State degree, I could never be tenured. And that is one thing I see now has changed, because you can be a teaching professional. For example, I think Beth is associate teaching professor. And so you felt like no matter what you did, you were never going to be part of the regular faculty. But the Honors College and Architecture really gave me the opportunity. Directing the London Center was a 10-year job, and I got to do it. Pretty much anything. So I feel like I didn't feel like I had to get that degree to vindicate, my teaching in the Honors College. I felt like I really was able to fulfill what I wanted to do in education and in writing. I have 4 books on Murdoch. That, by being in the Honors College, I don't think I could have taught freshman comp forever. I really don't think I could have. But I really, it was a pleasure doing all of the things I was able to do.
So you've mentioned the London Center as one of the things being that you really appreciated doing. Could you talk a little more about that experience?
It was not honors. I had 47 students. Many of them I had to talk to about things I didn't talk to my own sons about. And I had 3 sons who were in college then, I think, at the time, or close to it. We changed the program a little bit, because at the time you had to avoid financial problems in England. If you have an account, you have to make an appointment to get a withdrawal. And so the students were getting their weekly or monthly, I think it was monthly then, amount from me. So I would be taking tens of thousands of pounds on a subway across London from the bank. And my husband looked at that system and said, "You will not be directing the London Center if that happens." And so I said, "What can we do?" And he said, "Well, make an appointment with the Ball State Credit Union and tell them that they can put the money in each of the students' accounts." And they said, "Well, I'm sorry, we can't do that." And I said, "Well, Star Bank can." And suddenly let me talk to my administrator, and we can do that. And the people who followed me, including Lori Lindbergh, were so grateful for that change. But that change wouldn't have been made if my husband hadn't pushed it. But it's that type of thing. There's so much going on. And Lola at the business office loved my husband because he is an accountant. The books balanced at the end of the program. It's just accounting. I think as academics, they're not used to accounting situations. And I think that, that was one of the problems. But all of that aside, it it was a it was a really good program, except I have to say the British faculty gave A's so that more people would come and more people would be happy with the program. And I took 3 people with me who were on academic probation who were told this is a good way to get your average up. So, I can remember those types of things, but, we can probably set most of them aside. But I think everybody has the opportunity to improve a program, and I think we left the program, more improved because, it made it easier. Because as a director, especially if you're a director alone, and most people are, my husband, came, for a 3-week period. That was it. Then, you have to do things on your own. And there's a lot to be done, and it's a big responsibility when you have that many students. I had a student with his front teeth knocked out. He did not walk into a lamppost. I'm absolutely certain he didn't. It's those types of things, that everybody has to put up with. But you just have to be prepared to do so. But I will say the honors groups never had any of the problems that some of the students had. And I think just being in a foreign country, a lot of them needed to be reminded daily that it's not a comfortable zone like home is, and people will view you as an American and they will view you differently. So, try not to call attention to yourself.
You talked about the type of community that you felt at University of Colorado and how you felt that it's separated women versus men. How do you feel the Honors College does at bringing everybody together?
I really didn't feel any difference between men and women, or, maybe the architecture students are over by themselves because you never see them usually. But, that wasn't there. I think everyone is given an opportunity to do anything you want. I don't think you have to. There's certainly no bad comments about you shouldn't be here, or things like that. That I know of students in other colleges who have gotten those comments. So I do think the Honors College tries to be inclusive, and pretty much it is.
Why do you think it's important for majors such as biology, science, or other sciences, and then architecture to get that type of humanities education that the honors provides?
Well, because it gives you an opportunity to see other things in the world than mathematics or physics or something like that. I think it's very hard to, and for one thing, you learn to be social. College is more than just books. It's learning, it's growing up, it's learning how to get along with people, it's learning how to get along with people other than people just like you. It's learning something about other people's interests. It's not really easy to talk to somebody if you're not a physics major and all they're interested in is physics. Music, I think there are so many areas that are required in honors: music, architecture, drama. All of those things come up that you're just not going to choose to take a course like that. You don't have room in your curriculum for it.
So you've discussed how you were unable to get tenure since you got your degree from Ball State. Did you ever consider leaving for another university where you could get tenure, or?
I did, but not until I was held back by a couple of things. One thing was my husband's businesses, and the other thing was my in-laws were still alive. After they died, then I was able to go someplace else. But, I was interviewed at, Arizona State, University of Central Florida, places like that. But I didn't really feel that it was, I was happy what I was doing, and I didn't feel like I was going to be happy doing what they wanted me to do. So I wasn't, offered a job, but it didn't lead me to really continue looking. I was getting closer to retirement age, and my husband had already retired. I think he retired when he was 55 or 6. They sold the businesses, and he was wanting to go to Denver to run the grandkids' tennis there. One of those grandchildren is now a senior at Lake Forest playing tennis, and the other one is a sophomore in college. So, it's been a long time, but I don't think going to another university was the answer. I was very happy at Ball State. I just wished there could have been some type of an opportunity for tenure. And, but as I said, I was doing what I enjoyed doing.
And would you say the Honors College was a large part of why you stayed and why?
Oh, absolutely. The Honors College and writing and design curriculum.
So you mentioned that you lived in Marion throughout the time that you worked here.
Yes.
Did you ever venture into the Muncie community within a class that you were teaching at Ball State, whether through the Honors College or through the College of Architecture?
Well, only in a tangent with the College of Architecture, which ran the Muncie Urban Planning, Muncie Urban Design Studio. So there were, if I was working with Tony Costello was running that program. And if I was working with one of his studios, then they were doing that. They were preparing, for example, designs for improving a church in a black community or a downtown storefront or things like that. But most of my community service has been in Marion.
So you stated that you were also involved with the Mideast Honors Association and then the National Collegiate Honors Council. Why did you feel that you should be involved with other honors colleges in general, not just Ball State's Honors College?
Well, it's amazing what you find out about your own college from other people. I didn't realize how large a program Ball State had until I started working. I was secretary treasurer for MIHA, so I started reading. Most of the programs were small, but even the other colleges were not big. Like when you went to an NCHC convention, Ball State was like the third highest numbers there. And I enjoyed being around the students. I wanted to do something I could for the program, which had done quite a bit for me, I felt.
What types of major differences did you notice between Ball State's honors colleges and the other honors colleges?
Okay. Well, I can speak mostly of Denver Metro. Very small, maybe 90 students, something like that. And they don't really have to take, maybe they have to take 3 or 4 honors courses to get an honors with their degree. So they don't really have, they can take other courses which are designated as an honors course. But the teacher from that particular field signs off that this is going to be an honors course. You have to do a little something extra, that type of thing. They had a very small house and room for about 6 students to get together. And, it just didn't seem like a large enough group that you could actually see other people on campus and recognize someone you knew. Okay. The other thing about it, it was an inner city campus. It's downtown Denver. And they did things like, I taught the thesis course, and which got them through everything, choosing their advisors and all of that, and writing the first chapter for 17 students. That was the last course I taught. But the humanities courses, they didn't run them very often because they couldn't make up the numbers. And I think it's kind of the same thing. I know when one of my sons was considering going to Indiana instead of Purdue, and his older brother was at Purdue, and I said, well, look at their honors program. Well, he had to live in the honors dorm, which he wasn't willing to do at IU. I said, okay, then I guess you better cross out IU. And most of their classes were like that, you add it. So they really didn't have a group of people that, I think if you go to a large university, you need to have a group of people that you feel comfortable with, because it's very difficult if you're at a big university and you don't get along with your roommate, or even if you do get along with your roommate, is that the only person you're going to see? So I think, a lot of the ambiance of the university is difficult in large situations, and I think the smaller honors colleges that, can't provide the faculty that Ball State does, I think it makes a big difference in the education you're going to get.
You were talking about sizes of honors colleges, and the Ball State Honors College has over 1,000 students. Do you think that number could make it hard for sometimes faculty to create more personal relationships with the students?
No, because especially if you're teaching humanities, you're going to see a large group of students for an entire year. And you're going to recognize the students that come in and come out of the honors college and the honors house. And you know the names of a lot of them from talking to other faculty. And I pretty much knew quite a few, several hundred honor students, even though I was just teaching usually 2 humanities courses a semester. So.
And then you mentioned you advised senior thesis projects at
Denver Metro.
In Denver Metro. And then did you also do advising for theses here at Ball State?
No.
No? Okay.
I had some thesis students, so I did have that. But at Denver Metro, there was a semester class in which many of their theses involved using live subjects. And so there's a lot of detail into getting permissions and qualifying for using live subjects. Say you're going to invite, because they did things with the Denver community from the nearby communities to bring children in and give them opportunities for for a fun day that involved games as well as some education, as well as maybe even food, and they had a feed the homeless right on campus. So they had a lot of local things going on. But the way Ball State runs it, I didn't do any of that thesis prep except that I had thesis students, and so I did that.
Okay. And you'd mentioned that your youngest son went to Ball State and went through the Honors College. How did having a child go through the Honors College change your perception of what it can do for a student?
No, I was very happy because he was a board student through high school. Through most of the time, I don't think he cracked too many books in high school and managed to get very good grades. And it got him into, well, it changed his life when he took Dr. Vanderhill's wilderness class. And he went on and did his honors thesis on the development of Two Elk Creek in Beaver Creek area in Colorado, and hiked it with his dad and with a friend of theirs who was a mountain climber. And then he decided he would go into environmental law. So that made a big difference for him, and he was actually interested in something. I think the problem that honor students face, some of them, because they're bright, is they have so many opportunities, it's difficult to decide what they want to do with their lives. And it's hard to get them engaged in something because there are so many people pulling in different ways on them. And so it's not a terrible thing, but it's something that when you have too many choices, it's sometimes hard to settle on just one.
You'd mentioned that he took a course with Dr. Vanderhill, and I know that Dr. Vanderhill also supervised his thesis. Did you also have any personal connection with Dr. Vanderhill?
Yes, we knew him.
Could you talk a little bit about what he was like?
He's a former basketball coach, and he once said to my husband, I think my husband asked him why he decided to quit coaching. He said, "I didn't want 18-year-old men deciding on my career as a basketball coach." And truthfully, that's kind of what happens. But I mean, it was a off-the-wall comment. But he was easy with the kids, easy to talk to, easy to get along with. I berated him a few times about how much it was costing us for our son, because you can't guess, he's an attorney for the EPA, and you can't get a job like that unless you get a second law degree, an LLM in environmental law. And I said, "You already have a doctorate, honey." He said, "No, Mom, I need another one." And here's the expensive school I want to go to, and did. So it's mostly if we would see each other. It wasn't really a social thing because we were in Marion and he was here, but we saw each other at a few things and would talk, and it's mostly about thanks a lot for getting Jim interested in all of this, and he'd just smile. Yeah.
And so, did you retire in 2009? Is that correct?
I thought it was 6, but it might be 9. No, I think it was 9. Let's see.
Okay. And then
I think we've been in Denver almost 10 years, so yeah, about then.
Why did you feel that was the right time to retire for you?
Because the funding at writing and design curriculum ended, and my husband, my husband wanted to work with the grandchildren, and my son was having international projects in Denver, or from Denver, and his wife was a teacher, and somebody was needed to run the kids to their tennis and to work with them, and so he wanted to go, and so I was going to be missing WDC. And the other thing was, at the time, it had been tossed around that there would be this teaching program that you have in now, and then the current president then said no, that she wanted to see degrees at the back of the booklet that would impress parents. So that kind of turned me off. And so I thought, okay, we'll go back to Colorado. And so we did.
And then in 2013, you went back to Denver Metro to teach. What brought you back into teaching?
Well, I miss the students. I miss the students now that I'm not teaching anymore. I don't miss a lot of administrative things like that, but I still write. I still do academic things with the International Murdoch Society, that type of thing. I still have a lot of international colleagues, but I miss the teaching.
Are there any students from Ball State that you are still connected with?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what kept your relationship?
Mostly they sent me a Christmas card or something, and I thought they had to have gone to some trouble to find out where I was. So, and the one I'm thinking of was an architecture student, a female, and then my graduate assistant from the London Center, who now is teaching honors in South Carolina, and a few people like that.
And then, as you've mentioned, you're still very active with your Irish Murdoch research and studies, and you currently work at the Center for Irish Murdoch Studies in Kensington University in the UK.
Uh-huh.
Could you talk a little bit about what that's like working for them?
Well, it's they had their Murdoch archives, and so basically letter runs from her to other notable people, and from actually that's mostly that way because she destroyed most of the letters that came to her or left. That's very common among writers. And her libraries, her home library, her Oxford library, all of that were acquired by Kingston University. Now, that person, well, I probably won't talk about that, but there's an Irish Murdoch newsletter, which I edited for many years, is now a journal, and so I'm on the journal board, and then I'm on the board for acquisitions, and so it's in special collections at Kingston University, protected by legal documents that they can never sell it. And I mean, this is an academic fight, that the one I'm not going to talk about, due to a dean misusing funds that were fundraised by the Murdoch Society for archival materials, which disappeared, and he was let go from his position, and the person who was directing most of this retired, and then there's a new Iris Murdoch Center at another university. However, her husband set things up before she retired. She was getting to retirement age, that they could never sell for profit. They could give to another university, but never sell for profit. The £500,000, which was raised through various V&A, the Victoria and Albert funding, lottery, those things which the Iris Murdoch Society, most notably Anne Rowe, raised, and then could see that the dean was wanting to appropriate them instead. So that's something we don't really need to talk about, but I'm just telling you, what has happened. So now that everything is at Chichester University, except the archives are still at Kingston, but it's really unfortunate. So anyway, they're moving on. But I'm just kind of, if they wanted, do you think this will work or do you not, so it's very light duties I have with them.
Do you still give presentations on her?
Yes.
The work you've done? Mm-hmm. What are some of the topics that you like to discuss when you present on her?
I really like to talk about her architecture, her use of spatial, the way she uses her spaces for evoking different moods and things like that. She was a brilliant woman, and if you read like her first novel, which was Under the Net, 1954, when London was blitzed on the East End, St. Paul's and all of that, and all the Wren churches, many of them lost most of the churches, and then they combined bell tower from this one and this from that one and that. So she describes it in her novel in the way that pulls you through the space. It's very architectural, and it was how it looked at the time. So and she does that very well. So the last book, the book I always wanted to write, was on her sacred spaces, and you could see from my earlier emphasis on Pantheon, that's an architectural icon that, and the way we use it today, that really interested me. That was on Iris Murdoch's London, because I learned about London, the first time I went to London was in the 80s. So that's 20 years after I started reading Murdoch. But I learned all about London from her novels because they were so London specific. She had 32 novels, and 29 of them are set in London. And every time so I started going for research in the 80s, and every time I went to London, I would take 2 or 3 novels, because I had them all boxed out, what was where. And as she described it, she described the iron gates. They look like the iron gates that she described. And then her characters would then go to, like if they're in a crisis, they would head to the National Gallery and stand in front of a portrait or a painting and gain sustenance from it. And it's that type of thing that I really liked about her. But I felt like I couldn't write the book because I wasn't British, because there's so much that you need to be an insider about London then. And so in talking about her sacred spaces, then my colleague who just retired from Kingston that I was talking about earlier we decided to do it together. And then one of the architects here, Paula So, who I was visiting this morning, which is why I was running a little late, is in an assisted living home out here, Morrison Woods. And so I went to see, he did all of the drawings for the book and the watercolor for the cover. And so to me, I like to talk about that because my other books were more like, you know, the bibliography, which is, you know, over 1,000 pages, you know, those types of things. They're just, you know, academic. One of my books was translated in Japanese by the Iris Murdoch Society in Japan. And Iris Murdoch used to be taught in the universities there because they taught English by reading British novels in the universities in Tokyo. And so I had, you know, many Japanese colleagues. One of them came to our house in Denver and went through all of my files, you know, that type of thing. But that was, so understanding Iris Murdoch is the one that, but really the thing I'm most interested in is space, because as I said, if I was able to relive my life at a younger age, I would definitely do architecture history, because that to me is, and I can see it in all of her books. But of course the thing that was genius about Murdoch is that anything you were interested in, you could see in her books. You know, she was polymath, just amazing. But it's very sad she died of Alzheimer's. But anyway, so that's the type of thing. So the things that I usually talk about have something to do with that now. The last article was on, you know, 30 years of Iris Murdoch Society, from the newsletter to the journal, Japan, America, and the UK. I mean, that was the last thing just turned it in. That was the last thing I've written. That wasn't as interesting as what can you say?
So were some of those topics similar to the ones you would teach in your honors colloque about Iris Murdoch?
The honors colloque, I just took five of her novels, and we talked about London. We talked about really her characterization, her moral philosophy, and her aesthetics. And those are the things I thought were the most important about her. So those are the things I talked about. You know, not so much, you know, London was kind of a sideline, but her aesthetics, that she felt that all of us were, like she used the icon of when she had her portrait painting for the National Gallery by Tom Phillips, she had the Flaying of Marsyas by Titian was the background painting. And she felt that's how difficult it was to let go of ourselves, that we're all egoists, and even in our relationships with each other, then we think of ourselves first. We don't really recognize the other person. And so what she wanted us to strive for was otherness, recognizing the other person as having the right to exist, having values and ideas and wants that were just as important to them as ours were to us, instead of looking at them as, how can this person help me? Or, you know, when you're having a conversation, well, I can't wait till they stop so I can say what I want to say, you know, that type of thing. And she said it was as difficult as being flayed alive to do that. And so most of her characters are not nice people, and because of that difficulty. So her moral philosophy was in getting yourself to the point that you can sublimate yourself. So we looked for that in her novels.
And how did students typically respond to those types of lessons and morals?
They really liked her novels, and it was something that they could see. I mean, almost everybody can recognize themselves in the, oh, I do act like that around people, but it's really hard not to, because, and she said it, it's a healthy ego. That's how we survive. We survive by taking care of ourselves. And it's you're letting yourself open for an awfully lot if you don't take care of yourself. So it's that's very difficult. And her novels were very interesting as well. I mean, bizarre in many cases. More even her older novels, she were more contemporary than you would expect for the time.
How would you typically gauge a student's understanding of her novels? Like, how would you grade them?
More that they could explain their position with examples, with concrete examples. Most of the time we talked about, I had them talk about where in the book could you see X, Y, or Z, and how accomplished was that rendering.
Do you think that type of assessment was beneficial to students in gaining a better understanding of how just to completely formulate ideas and then explain them?
I do think that giving examples, that's one of the things that we seem to have lost today, is that we form an opinion, but is the opinion ours? And why do we think that way? And what is actually really behind it? So thinking for yourself, I think, is one of the difficulties today, that it's not necessarily celebrated.
So do you think, or how do you think the Honors College betters students into thinking more for themselves?
The fact that there is actually no one-way grading, no A, B, C, D, all of these, none of these, that you actually have an opportunity to explain why you think the way you do, why you got out of this what you got out of it, and that you can actually think that way. Now, when I was in school in the 60s, I still remember Professor Higman, because he gave us 2 left-wing journals that we had to memorize, and our test was an outline of the articles in the journals. If you put the right answer down, you got 1 point for every point. If you put the wrong answer down, it was -2. And A was about 36. Then you had an essay in which you were to spew back to him what he said to you in class. And I always prefaced mine by, according to Professor Higman, because I really didn't believe most of what he said. But, that was okay. You should really have an opportunity to hear everybody's point of view. But it was the idea of that you had to only think his way, which I never saw anything like that in the Honors College. And, that told me right away when I started teaching, that was never going to be the way I wanted to do. Just like with the students I had who were fundamentalists, they didn't have to agree with me. But they had to at least be exposed to it, and at the end, if they still believe that way, fine. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time arguing with them, but just be presented with the whole view and then go from there. And I saw an awfully lot of that when I was teaching, that people did that.
Do you think that's also why the Honors College advocates for discussion-based classes, so students can get a better understanding of what everybody's thinking?
Yes, and that's the other thing that I noticed in the discussion, is that you didn't have to think the same thing, because nothing kills a conversation like if somebody says something that you don't agree with and everybody jumps in, or if somebody says something you agree with and nobody else says anything else, from your own experience, that's not much of a conversation. And that isn't the way it is in life.
Yeah. So I think that is everything. So as we bring our interview to a close, is there anything that wasn't asked or discussed today that you would like to talk about?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So then with that, we'll bring our interview to an end. On behalf of the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project, I want to thank you, Dr. Bove, for participating in our project.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.